Yeah. Gas has worked effectively for 100 years because it's easy, it's convenient, it's available, and our goal is to make electric mobility as fast, cheap, and convenient as gas.
Broadcasting from Washington, D.C., this is Insider's Guide to Energy.
This episode of Insider's Guide to Energy EV miniseries is powered by Power. Power helps your business transition to electric vehicles by simplifying charging, managing payments, and optimizing your charging data.
Hey, Chris, how are things?
Doing great today. Looking forward to a show, another EV episode. These are always my favorite.
I was on a stage yesterday and I was asked a rather challenging question about EV charging infrastructure. I was asked the question of what is the future of battery swapping? So I'm delighted that we've got Khaled Hassounah today with us to talk about that topic exactly. Khaled, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. It's a pleasure to be here and talk to you guys. I'm Khaled Hassounah. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Ample, which, as I think you give it away, is a battery swapping company in the electric mobility space.
And if you had been me, sat on that stage yesterday with a rather challenging audience of electric vehicle experts in front of you, what would you have done to describe your business to them to help them understand where you think the future of this technology might be?
Sure, sure. I mean, the first thing I would say is that people are treating electric infrastructure or electric mobility infrastructure as if everybody's driving an electric car. And I think that's not true yet. We're barely scratching the surface. We have less than 1% of humanity driving electric cars. And every time you make that massive of a shift, you're going to have to understand where the bottlenecks are. You can't assume we already know what the answer is, right? You're going to try to understand what the challenges are, what's going to make it difficult, what makes it expensive, what makes it hard to roll out. And in a way, from a battery swapping perspective, it has a place in the sense that it works just as well as gas does. It's a way to move electricity physically, and that has a lot of advantages. I'm sure we're gonna dig into here, but I would say it is a very effective way of delivering energy. The way people have envisioned it so far, maybe was the first attempts that did not really do it in a way that addressed all the challenges that made it not work. But doesn't mean should stop innovating. And I think at Ample, what we'd like to think is that we innovated enough to actually make it effective. So to go back to your question, I would say there are places in the world that where battery swapping is working really well. I mean, you look at kind of Asia in general and China in particular, and it's probably growing a lot faster than charging is, just because it solves a lot of fundamental challenges charging has not solved. Now, one thing that's important to disclaim when you talk about battery swapping is that no one is trying to create a solution that solves all of the problems, right? There's a reason five of the largest 10 companies in the world, all of them put gas in your car. It's because the problem is so massive, you're going to need all kinds of solutions. So charging works, makes sense, has certain use cases, but there's a lot that is not met by it, and that's where battery swapping will shine.
And you described some places in the world where battery swapping has started to catch on. What are the sort of criteria that are driving or incentivizing that swapping rather than plugging something in? What do you think it is that is driving those economies to adopt a swapping technology?
To be honest, I don't think it's the nature of the problem as much as the scale of the problem, right? So if you look at China, um, our understanding of the problem, and we spend a lot of time trying to understand and learn and look at what people are doing. I mean, that's what everybody's doing in electric mobility right now because everybody's in learning mode, right? Is that the reason China is adopting swapping is not necessarily because charging didn't work for them. I mean, they have 6 times as many fast chargers as the US, right? They have people driving electric cars everywhere. So if you think, you'd look at them and say, oh, they solved the problem. But because they scaled so much, they found the limits of that solution. They understand that it works really well for a big part of the use case. In order to keep kind of breaking the barriers, you're going to have to find other solutions that address other fundamental challenges that charging has not been able to address. So we believe that, and hopefully supported by evidence, that the reason people are making those shifts, the reason the Chinese government incentivized swapping more than even does charging, is because they understand you really need that other solution to address the other big chunk of the challenge.
But is that really a need, or is it, as you said in your opening, that we're early in the whole game, right? So when battery technology gets better and I can charge quicker and the infrastructure's in place, is there still the need to swap? Is there still a value there?
There is. We do strongly believe there is, and mostly because I think the need is not what you'd expect, right? Like so often people think that challenge with chargers is installing chargers, and that couldn't be further from the truth, right? Like so that's the problem if you have a garage and you want to put a charger to charge your car. You're at the last kind of step where all you need to do is to put that charger so you can actually plug it in. But if you step back and you look at it as an infrastructure problem, the challenge with charger has nothing to do with charger. It has to do with the grid and getting the grid for again 100 years. I mean, because that's really as long as we've been playing with the electric and playing with mobility and playing with gas. The reason grids have, or the way we've been thinking about grids is more like a tree structure, right? You massive generation, you have massive trunks coming into cities, exactly, and you spread them out. So you assume that at the ends where you're plugging into the grid in a factory, in a house, in an office, you have a small amount of power you're using for a very long period of time. That's the way it's structured. It's like so. So the last kind of branch is very thin, but it's sustained. And now we're going and we're saying, well, mobility is exactly the opposite. In mobility, you actually have a fight between the time you're getting energy and the time you're using the car. Every time you're charging the car, it's time you're actually not using it to do what it's supposed to be doing, which is mobility. So the way you solve that problem is you say, listen, I'm going to drive it for as long as I want. And the moment I want electricity, I want it all immediately, right? And that's not how grids are structured. So you're going to plug into the grid to ask for tons of power, and then you're going to stop because now you're going to go drive. And that's the fundamental problem. So you look at across the cities, everywhere, that's the fundamental problem. That's why you look at New York, and they're struggling to get fast chargers. You look at San Francisco, tech capital of the world, we barely have any fast chargers in the cities, right?
So I describe exactly the same problem statement to my customers, but I describe it slightly differently. I always say that it's basic physics. Energy is power times time. And the reality is that you just cannot move electricity as fast. The power isn't there to get it into the vehicles. And what you're doing is by basically taking the container out and replacing it with a refilled energy container, you're removing that time barrier. And people have looked at this technology before. What led you to look at this? Where did the inception of Ample come from?
Sure, and I'm gonna start with something I usually like to say because I think a lot of people who have been following technology will immediately agree, right? Which is people who succeed in introducing solutions that work are not necessarily the first ones who thought of that solution, right? Google was not the first search engine. Facebook was not the first social network. Tesla was not the first electric car. So really getting it's funny, innovation, and that's another kind of favorite thing, which is innovation is not really coming up with an idea. Innovation is figuring out how to make it actually work at scale for a lot of people in a way that economically viable. So you're right, battery swapping has been tried before. That doesn't mean it's a bad idea. It just means people have not yet figured out how to make it work effectively. And I think that's what we have been able to accomplish. That's we step back and we say, okay, swapping good, approach not necessarily there yet. How do you make it work effectively? And if I want to give you kind of the few second summary of what we've done that we think makes it actually viable, is the modularization of the battery. We took the battery and we broke it into small modular pieces. And a lot of things become easier. You can have the battery adapt to the vehicle, you reduce the amount of weight you're moving, you can have station that works across a wide range of cars, et cetera, and we can spend more time on that. But that's really the fundamental innovation at Ample.
Well, let's do that because we've had a conversation. Our audience doesn't necessarily know. We're alluding to battery swapping, but it's got a lot of challenges. There's a lot of different manufacturers. They haven't really built their vehicles to necessarily design to swap batteries, from what I can tell. Yet you're a proponent of your swapping technology working on many different types of vehicles, and that it's a very quick process and easy process. So maybe walk us through visually. As for our podcast, you might need to explain it. The YouTube
I leave
listeners
my
maybe
hand
will
on
watch
it.
some video on this if you share video on it. But explain what really happens.
Sure. So let me go back to where I left my statement. Thank you for allowing me to take it forward. Right. So first, swapping good, the approach is not good. So because traditionally, let me start from there because I can contrast. Traditional people have done is they say, okay, well, How do you swap a car battery? You build a big robot, can move 1,000-pound object. You drive over it. Often you have to dig in the ground to put it because it's so big. And then it comes, grabs this 1,000 pounds. Imagine the kind of machine that's accurately, repeatedly, many times a day does that, right? How expensive it is and how complex. Moves it out and puts another battery in. And the moment you look at that, anyone who's kind of technically oriented or at least logically oriented, we immediately see kind of big alarm bells to start hitting, right? It's like, first is, well, that robot's going to be very expensive. How can you make that economically viable? The second is, well, you're going to need to change the vehicle so that this battery is designed to plug in and be bolted to last 10 years now needs to come out in and out a few times a month or possibly a few times a week. And the second thing is, okay, well, you take this big battery from call it a SUV, and then you need to put in a tiny car, and you need to put in a big truck. It's going to be a different size battery unless you have everybody use exactly the same size of battery. And then you have other things like future compatibility, etc. So going back to kind of our approach, what we did is say, if you break this battery in small modular pieces, few things become a lot easier. First, you don't need now one big standard battery, right? Instead, what we do is we build this adapter plate, and hence come kind of our ability to work with automakers without having them change a car that has the same shape as the original car's battery. So for example, we've announced we're working with Stellantis on the Fiat 500e. The car is designed to work with a specific size battery. We have an adapter plate, same shape, same software interface, same connector in the front, same mechanical structure rigidity that goes in the same cavity. So at the factory, Stellantis is either installing this battery, fixed battery, or the ample plate. And within that plate, it defines how many of our modules fit. Think of it as Lego blocks, right? Now we go to a truck. We announced a partnership with Daimler Truck on their Mitsubishi Fuso vehicle. It's a bigger battery. It's a truck. It's designed differently, requires different structure rigidity. The structure is different around it, just a shell, but the same modules, more of them installed in the same car. So that's kind of maybe the first aspect of it that allows us to say, now you have the same battery works across different kinds of cars by simply just allowing yourself to rearrange the battery based on the space available in the vehicle and the structure requirement of the vehicle, etc., etc.
That's quite insightful, because the thing that went through my head is when you mentioned Daimler trucks. Daimler, when they launched their initial trucks, they were using Mercedes car batteries configured inside them. I'm driving a Mercedes at the moment. So in theory, there's not a long way to go to imagine that the Mercedes team might adopt the ample plate, the adapter plate. You'd work out what the configuration of modules was, and theoretically my car could become a car that was compatible with your charging stations. But do I need to configure that car before I buy it, or do you adapt it after I purchased it?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. Just first to comment quickly on what you're saying, I think that's probably the automakers. That's the one thing they're super excited about when we start working with us, is that we don't require them. I mean, Mercedes kind of reuse the battery. Most actually automakers don't. Like the Fiat 500e is completely different. The battery in the EK0 platform is completely different than the Ram ProMaster that Stellantis just announced, 110 kilowatt hour, and they literally need to redevelop a whole battery from scratch every time in each one of their car platforms because they're very different needs. But the beauty is now the same core module works across all of these cars, and that means that also it reduces the cost of development, but also all of them can get 100% charge in 5 minutes, right? So to your question, the approach we take, we never wanted to be an aftermarket company. So our approach was not you buy your car and then modify it so that it works. We want to work with the automakers, and that's every automaker we announce, we're actually integrating with them at the factory. So when you buy your vehicle, it comes with ample technology, right? So the reason to make it easy to kind of be a drop-in replacement, mostly to reduce the complexity of engineering to integrate us so we can go to market faster, and also not take away their flexibility and be able to design the vehicle any way they want to keep advancing it. We don't want to kind of restrict them. So that's kind of our superpower with them. But yeah, you buy the car with the ample technology at the factory. And in a way, if you look at it, the amount of battery EVs on the road is a small fraction of what's going to come on the road. That's what we're really more interested in. We want to scale. We want to get 1 billion cars on the road. We don't want to make sure the few million that are installed going to work, right?
All right, so you've got this adapter plate or the battery configuration for the model vehicle, and you've got some list of approved vehicles that we'll ask more about in a minute. What's the user's experience then? So you just said in 5 minutes I get to 100%. So I'm still scratching my head going, okay, where's the magic?
Yeah. No, it's good. So you look for same way you search Google Maps or Apple Maps, I guess, whatever you prefer to find a gas station. You search for ample swapping station. You drive in. Once you arrive at the station, our plate in the car is wirelessly connected to the station, so we can know which car it is. We do the magic authentication to make sure you are who you say you are and what your car is. The station actually adjusts itself because the station is designed to be flexible. It can handle different wheelbases, different track sizes, and our robotics is flexible to pick up the battery anywhere because it's different arrangement as we described, right? So anyway, it arranges itself. First it asks you, are you sure you want to swap? We don't want to move robots without knowing you want to. You say yes. It arranges itself, takes a few seconds. The station door rolls up and you just drive in. Now we guide you in the drive, so it kind of think uh, a bit cooler car wash, right? Like where we're telling you, giving you lights, making it easy. You go in, you align, but then the moment you're in the right place, and people get it very quickly. It's really easy. Then we say, okay, are you ready to swap? We just want to again get confirmation. You're interacting with the user. You say yes, and then the system autonomously actually swaps your battery. We lift the car, the our stage or kind of robot comes in, picks them one at a time, and then removes the battery modules, put new ones in, puts these trays back in the car. The car comes down and you drive off. Now, I'm trying to describe it using my hands. I'm not successful. If you go to our website, you can see kind of a quick video that shows you robotics. But in effect, to make it a lot simpler, you drive in, you wait for a few minutes, you drive off with 100% charge. That's a user experience. That's what you see.
All right, so I've driven in theoretically. This really badass robot comes, does all kinds of stuff in my car. A few minutes
Yeah.
later, there's a new battery pack underneath. That goes to ownership and business models, right? So if I
Absolutely.
buy an EV today and it's got a battery in, a huge part of that cost is probably that battery. So if I'm a
Yeah.
manufacturer and I want to have some flexibility, or maybe I want to have a different way of financing, let's talk about this new model of batteries. So who actually owns this battery and how does it get paid for?
Yeah. So let me again, as I'm gonna do again and again. I'm gonna take one step back before I can jump in. Yeah, we people have been using gas cars and owning them and leasing them and financing them for a long time, right? And then what we've done to people is we went and we said, hey, we're gonna give you this new car. It's 30% more expensive, and guess what? The most expensive part of the car is the one that's going to go bad first. So you're going to have to make sure you charge it very carefully, and if you don't, you're gonna lose value, thousands of dollars. But listen, even if you do, this is going to lose value over time, and your car, the whole car, is going to lose value, and residual value at the end of life is going to be a lot lower. And you see tons of Nissan Leafs around with 40 miles of range that are worth $2,000, right? These cars should have been worth $12,000. So we don't think that's a good approach. We think you should not be owning your battery. That's not a good idea, because it's the part first that has a different lifetime than the rest of your car. Second, you should not be responsible for, please make sure this works really, really well. Instead, it's just a gas tank. You just want to get energy into your car. So our approach would be, you buy your car without the battery. You don't even worry about it. You pay us a subscription, and we'll make sure you always get a battery as good as needed for as long as you need it. So if you don't want to use it after 4 years, stop paying subscription, you move it to the next person. If you use it for 12 years, you can do that. And one quick thing just I will mention also is that over time battery will get good. We're now in the early, I don't know if you remember when iPhones first came out, everybody was afraid of buying an iPhone because in 3 months there's going to be a better iPhone coming out, or Android phone. So we're in that phase that we know the battery will get better. Now we're actually giving you that for free. As long as you pay a subscription, over time, we keep advancing the battery and giving you more range.
So I'm getting quite excited about quite a lot of this, because what we've seen with automotive manufacturers is they've had to continually improve their battery and get
Right.
more kilowatt hours squeezed into the frames, and the cars are going up and they're getting bigger and all this sort of stuff. But what you're actually describing is like your car's battery will get better over time because batteries will get better over time. And by the way, if a bit of that battery goes bad, one of the modules goes bad, I'm assuming you swap it out. That disappears and
Correct.
gets sent off on a different route. And next
Correct.
time when you turn up, you get a really good module. The technology will
Correct.
improve. And like you say, you're buying into an ecosystem which will improve as your vehicle improves. There's a lot of really cool stuff about this that suddenly changes the way that people will interact with that vehicle. The
Mhm.
question, of course, is can you build up a big enough ecosystem for people to buy into it? Where are you on that ecosystem development journey? Because we've mentioned two OEMs. Where's it going? Where are we getting to?
Yeah, yeah. No, it's a good question. So let me touch on that. So when we say two OEMs, those are the two OEMs we've announced, right? Like it takes us kind of few months to a couple of years of work, coordination, safety testing, validation, etc. before we get a car on the road. And we're actually working with a much bigger number of OEMs. So we've announced Stellantis, we've announced Daimler Truck, kind of top automakers in the world, top three. I mean, I think Daimler Truck, I think, is by far the largest truck maker in the world. But we're working with a few more. I can't say names, but let's just call them all of them top five automakers in the world. So I think within kind of months, it's going to be obvious that the vast majority of large automakers in the world, all of them are integrating Ample technology into it. So I'm making a big statement. And our rollout, just quickly, would be that the beauty of what we're doing is that we can roll out to demand. We're not kind of building chargers and hoping people come. We understand exactly where the sales are, where they're happening. We're coordinating with our partners, especially with our focus on fleets initially. We know where the demand is. Once you build enough stations, kind of think of gas station. Once you build enough stations in a geographic area, think the Bay Area, we're already covered. You go anywhere from Oakland, San Jose, San Francisco, and anywhere in between, you're within 5-10 minutes of a swapping station.
And there's not concern that manufacturers would want to try to differentiate with their software and their batteries. So I think of like Tesla wanting to own their battery, their gigaplants or something like that. Do you take any value away or commoditize to straight energy? And does it really matter at the end of the day if you do?
Yeah, and to be honest, the battery is already commoditized, right? Like if you think about it, I think the challenge you have is that you have tens of automakers that all of them want to build the best battery in the world. And only one of them will build the best battery in the world, right? Because by definition, best means one. So, but if you look at it, there's been initially, so when Tesla first started, there's a lot of innovation on battery pack design, right? How do you fit more? How do you make it safer? How do you make it streamlined, etc.? I think we're at a point in which that problem has been highly optimized, right? So right now you don't really pick a Volkswagen ID4, Kia Niro EV, or Ioniq 5 based on the battery. You don't go read the battery spec to find out. You say, does it have enough range? Does it work for me? But then you look, does it have luggage space? And can I fit my kids here, right? Like that's really what you think about when you buy a car. Same way when you buy a gas car, you don't think about how big the gas tank size. I guarantee you, most of us will not remember the size of our gas tank size. So a great degree, that's not where differentiation. Differentiation will come from the battery cell uh, efficiency. It's a science problem. And the challenge you have today is that it takes 5 years on average to get the best new chemistry into cars. And most of the time it doesn't make it into the newer cars. And we're actually opening the door to make it very easy to get it into new vehicles faster. So in a way, we're actually taking that problem off the front line and saying, let us get the best battery in our pool and we'll make sure we give you the biggest range you can have.
Do you see a point in the future when I might use a different battery for different things? I might pay less to get a commuter battery because I'm only going 20 kilometers a
100%.
day. And then on
Yeah.
holidays like Easter coming up, where I'm going to drive to go see family, I might want a heavier battery on the road where I put more wear and tear on the vehicle, but it gets me further. Is that something you see happening?
100%, right? Like so, and that's kind of the point also Neil was making, which is um, right now, because everybody has charging anxiety. No one is afraid of how far the car goes, but everybody's afraid what happens when it runs out of charge because you're kind of stuck, right? So everybody's trying to get as many kilowatt hours inside this chassis as possible to tell people, don't worry about it. You can go further. You can go visit your family, right? So that's the fundamental challenge. And I think the effect of that is that you have so many big batteries that most of the time you don't use, right? So what end up happening is that you commute 20 miles a day or 30 miles a day, and you have a 300 miles. You don't need that. mostly you need that because you're afraid of the long trip you're going to take. You don't want to buy a car that's not going to take you the few times a year you want to go further. And the charging is so painful that you don't want to go and wait at a fast charger for 2 hours every time at 1 a.m. every time you need to charge. So, but with our modularity, what we're able to do is to say, we can give you a smaller battery and make you pay less for it. So your car is a few $1,000s cheaper. This is not kind of, you're nice to the environment. This is, you're nice to the environment and it's a few $1,000s cheaper. But then at the same time, also, when you want to take a longer trip, we can put more modules in your car.
So can I go back to that battery swap? I arrive in my Fiat 500. I'm off on. I'm just doing my daily commute. The plate comes off the bottom of the car, and the modules are arranged on it. And you swap the modules and you put the plate back in the car. Is that a correct description?
Kind of, yes. So I'm sorry. So there's three components. There's a plate
Yeah.
that's installed in the car. The plate never comes out.
Okay.
Right, that stays in the car and that's connected the same way the original with a big connector, etc. Inside that plate there are battery trays, which is our unit swap, and these trays is what holds our battery modules. So think of it like the kind of pulling a drawer, but we're kind of pulling it out completely. We remove the modules, put new ones in, we get the drawer back or the trays and we put them in.
So nothing stops you filling half the trays and giving you
Correct.
half the weight, which reduces the weight concern around EVs. You get your daily commuting all sorted. You come back for another swap at the end of the week. I'm going away for the weekend. I fill all the trays. Now I'm fully loaded. I got my maximum range. And if I do go further than my range, I just pull over another swapping station.
That's exactly right.
Starting to become quite an elegant answer to the problem of, the charger anxiety, the range anxiety, and of course the other business models that spin up off the back of that.
And I'll tell you
Fascinating.
something funny, which is a Tesla uses a third of the energy stored in its battery moving the battery around. Right? That is like why do you do that? Like so, and there's good reason because really once you buy the car, you're stuck with it for 10 years or however long you want to own it. And now we're saying no, you're not. Like you can just choose. You want less weight. You can even like it has tons of application in commercial application when you're delivering goods. You're often fighting between the weight of the car and the weight of the payload. And now if you have less weight of the car or less battery weight, you can actually put more goods inside that truck and deliver more. So it just works in so many ways to be able to have the flexibility of saying, if I don't read the range, let me not pay for the cost and the weight of that range.
Now, I hear it in principle. I'm always a little bit of a pessimist and a little bit skeptical. How big do these facilities need to be? Because if I'm in a metropolitan area and I have a lot of batteries to swap and they're not that small, or if I'm on the side of the highway, so I'm on the interstate and I pull over into let's assume you get a contract at one of the interstates and I go in and want to change my batteries, you probably need a pretty big inventory of batteries sitting there. That's my assumption.
That's a good question. So I mean, there's two components to that question, right? Like one of them is how big are the stations, and the second is how big is the inventory, right? So first, let's address them quickly. So first, how big is the station? So because of modularity, the stations are a lot smaller, right? So if I take a big battery, I need space just to move that battery around. So the reason kind of a lot of these pack level swapping, build underground and build big building is the battery itself. If you're moving a car or maybe half the width of the car or the length of the car, you need tons of space just to move it around to be able to arrange it. In our case, we break it to small modules. Literally, we have a shelf in which we plug in batteries that are this big, right? So in a way, the
Can you
space
verbally describe that? Because our audience, a lot of folks are listening, not watching you.
Sure. So in a way, instead of taking the whole pack out, we're moving typically kind of 1/10 to 1/15 of it, which is the size of the module. So that's a much smaller module. It's kind of twice the size of your laptop. That's kind of how big it is. It's very, very small relative to the size of an EV battery, which is really a lot bigger. It's usually a dining table size, right? So for that size, you need a lot less space to move it around. And literally you arrange it on a shelf. So in our station, we have a thin compartment where there's a shelf of batteries and we have a pick and place mechanism, inserts in the shelf and takes another one out. In effect, the result of that is that our stations are actually pretty small, right? So we can drop a station, install a station in 3 days. Literally, we build it at the factory, we just drop it on the ground and we turn it on and we have a swapping station. So it's that simple to install and it fits in 3 parking spots. That's all we need. Just give us 3 parking spots and 3 days and we'll get a station up and running. So first, the stations are very small, and because we don't need construction, we're not digging in the ground, we don't need tons of space, we don't need lots of power. We said we reduce the power requirement. That's how we can deploy in urban spaces a lot easier, a lot faster. So if you look at San Francisco, you look around, there is how many places are there where there's a megawatt connection, you can do construction, and you need to use it for 10 years? How many places there's 3 parking spots with a 100 kilowatt connection you get from the building next door, and you can lease for 2 years? So that makes it a lot easier. I'm happy to address the inventory question, but I'll let you kind of ask me about it later if that's important. Yeah.
So I'm supremely excited about this, and we've started to hear and see signs of battery swapping emerging around the world. As a business, how old are you? How long have you been operating, and where are you on that journey to being able to enable me, sat here in the UK, roll out the door and swap my battery rather than charge my battery?
Sure. We're as a company, we've been a little over 9 years old. So we're kind of an adolescent startup. Uh, but we really spent the first 7 years of Ample hiding in a garage just developing technology. We did not, like we announced 2.5 years ago, because we didn't want to do, and that's kind of my co-founder John. This is now our first rodeo and our second company together. We don't want to have a dream and go tell the whole world about it. We want to first make sure it's real, we can bring it to reality. Spend a lot of time in a garage really just playing with technology. For the last 2.5 years, we've been rolling out technology just to demonstrate in the real world. But really, we know that our critical mass will start once we're fully integrated into an automaker. So you can just go buy a car with AMP technology. And recently, that's been our prime focus, and that's why we're announcing some partnerships and working very actively on others.
All right, that leads me to my last question of this interview, which is a crystal ball. So you're pretty bullish. You've been working on this kind of quasi stealth mode, and then you've come out and you've gotten some proof of concept. 24 months from now, how many of the top 3 automakers do you think will have this technology available to me as a consumer?
In 24 months, I'm pretty confident it'll be 100%.
All right, we're going to come back and we'll play that soundbite
Should we
back.
put time on the calendar?
I will absolutely mark that on the calendar. This has been a fascinating journey. I'm excited to hear about the technology. I'm still a bit of a pessimist because when it sounds too good to be true, I always worry a little bit that maybe Neil and I have been friendly and we haven't really pushed the edges. I assume some of our listeners will add comment or questions in the comments. Please do in the YouTube, on the LinkedIn. If we didn't cover it, just ask. I'm sure we'll get an answer when we're there. Thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast today.
It's a great conversation. Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it.
For our audience, we hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Insider's Guide to Energy EV series. If you have, don't forget to subscribe. Do watch us on YouTube and do subscribe there. And we'll see you again next time on the Insider's Guide to Energy EV series. Bye-bye for now.